All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and it finally feels and seems like summer has got here since the post-holiday weeks are upon us here. Had a good Memorial Day, and I have to say I'm seeing everyone's social media feeds being filled with all the deer work summer projects everyone's kind of kicking off, and I have to say I'm actually kind of ahead of the game this year for the first time. I'm not doing a whole lot of spring work other than some spraying and mowing. Most of my stuff will actually happen in the fall this year, so I'm a little bit of ahead of the curve. My to-do list is still relatively long, and just unfortunately it'll all have to kind of be crammed into the last kind of few months of the summer here, mainly July and the August months. But it won't be too long until we'll start really kind of seeing those velvet pictures hitting everyone's social media feed. Or we'll be in the midst of the velvet rut. I did get a chance to kind of get out and pull a few camera cards just to kind of see what we have going on a few of the properties, and we got some fellas sporting some bone here in the early stages of their growth, which just kind of fuels the fire a little bit and kind of gets you kind of jonesing for the season. It's you get some of these cool summer nights and definitely kind of get you ramped up and thinking about getting into a tree stand here in the not so distant future. For some states we're just about 3 months out from crawling into a tree stand. Here in PA, I guess we have June, July, August, and all of September, so it'll be the beginning of October. So roughly 4 months for most of us here in Pennsylvania until we get into a tree stand. But it's just around the corner, and we'll be back in the timber before we know it. I did wrap up my turkey hunting season here, I guess about 2 weeks ago. At this point, had a chance to get out with my dad, which is great. We worked a few birds in the morning, but unfortunately the rains kind of set in and kind of blew us out. So an unsuccessful turkey season this year, but that's okay. It was just kind of fun being out in the timber, and obviously a good time being able to get out in the woods with my dad. It's been a little while since we had a chance to do that, so definitely looking forward to doing more of that with him now that he has a property up here in PA that he'll be able to come up and hunt. Whenever he feels like he'll have a place to go. So looking forward to spending time with him there this fall. Today we have a gentleman on that's joining us, Curtis Zabul from Behind the Bow. I'm sure many of you have probably either, kind of happened to stumble across Behind the Bow online or on social media, in social media sectors, whether it was Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. They got a pretty heavy YouTube page or YouTube presence. Curtis is from Wisconsin, and I'm really, looking forward to the conversation. He was kind of recommended to me by a friend of mine, and I had been watching some of their videos, prior to being connected with Curtis. And the one thing that really kind of strikes you is the amount of knowledge that Curtis has, or the success that he's having. I guess more than anything, his perspective for someone for his age. He's a younger fella. When we think of the hunting industry and some of these guys who are out there, capturing film and really kind of getting after it, particularly on public land. A lot of these guys are, grizzled veterans, if you will, who are really kind of the ones pushing the envelope. And Curtis is one of these guys who's, holds his own with any of those guys in the industry, in my opinion. And he's a young cat, and it's just kind of amazing that he has as much knowledge as he does, and it's workable knowledge, where it's, some guys it takes, years to kind of figure out the information and then figure out how to actually use it. And he's one of those unique folks that he just has that passion, that grind, willing to put in the hard work. That when he does learn something, he figures out how to apply it, and he's not afraid of the hard work to kind of make it happen and kind of, all kind of come together and come to fruition with, putting deer on the ground. Easier said than done, and he'll definitely attest to that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get Curtis dialed in. But before we get Curtis on the line, let's hear this week's Whitetail Institute Food Plot Tip of the Week. Today, John shares 3 quick steps for preparing your seed bed.
All right, with any forage planting, the better you can work the seed bed up, the better you can present to that planting what I refer to as a ready-to-plant seed bed, an optimum growing environment, the better it can do. When you get to your planting date, you want your seed bed that you're going to plant to be in what I call ready-to-plant condition. And that means several things. Number one, always, is that soil pH has been adjusted if it's acidic. It needs to be adjusted to neutral soil pH. Number two, you want all the junk that was growing on top of the plot out of the way. Number three, you want to be at proper firmness and smoothness for that particular type of seed. The best thing to do is to start early. Start in the spring, plan on planting in the fall, start with a soil test in the spring, work in your lime. That'll be working for you. Take care of your grass and weeds during the spring and summer, and you'll be ready to plant by fall.
And that, folks, is a Whitetail Institute food plot tip of the week. If you'd like to learn which Whitetail Institute products might be right for you, head over to whitetailinstitute.com to check out their product selector tool to help you determine which forage will work best for your food plot needs. Now let's get back to the show. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and today I am joined by Curtis of Behind the Bow fame. Super pumped to have him on the show. He's also a buddy of our friend Greg Litzinger, who recently joined the Behind the Bow team, and Greg actually the one who kind of hooked us up. So super stoked to have Curtis on. How you doing, man?
Pretty good, man.
Good.
I'm glad to be on here. Appreciate the opportunity. This is my first podcast, so bear with talking and everything.
Man, I'm sure you'll be fine. I keep the bar pretty low on my side, so anyone on the other side of the phone is usually always going to outshine the fool on this side. So
all right, sounds good.
I think you'll be all right. But I know I gave just a little bit of an introduction of you. You know, you obviously have the Behind the Bow stuff that you're doing, and we'll of course get into that as we go. But for those that aren't familiar with you and what you do, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little bit of background information about yourself, like where you're from, how you got started in hunting, and what you do for a living.
Yeah, sure. I'm located in east central Wisconsin. I'm 26 years old. I'm a machinist. I make a bunch of stuff out of metal, a lot of parts for John Deere and Bobcat and different paper companies. I'm not just only obsessed with bow hunting, but gotta love the Green Bay Packers. And are you a Steelers fan?
I am a diehard Steelers fan. You guys got us there in 2000. What was it? 2010, I think.
The Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that one still sticks with me. Mendenhall, man, if he wouldn't have fumbled that ball, they were going on a good drive. But good for you guys. I always say, if the Steelers aren't going to win it in a given year, I am kind of the NFC team I pull for is the Packers. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I like the Steelers too.
There you go. So we can at least agree on that. Then I think
we can agree on that.
Yeah, that's a wrap, man. And podcast over, I think.
Yeah, I like MMA, and I like to be active. I like to go to the gym, play tennis with my dad, all that stuff. I used to trap and fish all the time, and that kind of escalated into bow hunting. I kind of got started. My dad started me out bow hunting when I was really young, and then I went with my uncles, and it kind of they didn't have a whole lot of time, to go out every single weekend and stuff with me. So I kind of just went by myself on the public lands and a couple little smaller private chunks. And it kind of just escalated from there. And I didn't really get super serious with the bow hunting until about 8 years ago, 2009. Yeah. And, that's when I really started. That's when I found the Hunting Beast and Dan Infalt and all those big timers, and started really focusing on buck beds and scouting hard. And I started caring a lot less about everything else and more about whitetails. And now I really don't have a whole lot of time for any of that other stuff. I don't fish much anymore. I don't trap anymore. I just pretty much strictly bow hunting. I mean, I go gun hunting with my uncles, and I made a video on my uncle's gun hunt last year. That was pretty cool. That's on our Behind the Bow YouTube page. But yeah, other than that, it's just strictly bow hunting for me. Pretty much, I'm obsessed.
Nice. Yeah, you sound like a guy that belongs on the podcast, man. Someone who has some whitetail addictions. I think most of us here are guilty of that. And I'll say, man, you don't have a whole lot of time for other stuff. I know when we were trying to get the podcast scheduled, your work schedules, it leads to you being able to get out in the mornings and hunt. But between the hunting and your work schedule, man, like you are jamming, your day is full, and I don't know how you would fit anything else in edgewise, to be honest with you.
Right.
I'm always seeing you out scouting too in the off season. So I mean, I'm trying to fit in some fishing there along the way would be kind of difficult. But you mentioned you're a machinist, so I have to ask this because I have no what you would call machining skills whatsoever, especially when it comes to metal. I had a bad run-in when I was in high school with even whenever I was working with wood with a lathe, which pretty much ended my machining possibilities right then and there. But since you're a machinist and you're working with metal, do you ever make like your own stands, or is that something you're interested in, or is that something you've done in the past? Or I'm sure you've probably modified some.
I've never really went into like super detail into like trying to make my own stuff. I mean, I definitely could. I'm definitely not an engineer. Right. I'm more of okay, look at the blueprint and I can make this, you know what I mean?
Right.
I'm more of definitely just looking at a blueprint. But yeah, I mean, I've always thought about making my own products and everything, but I guess I do enough machining the way it is. I kind of just want to go bow hunting. You know what I mean?
Right. Fair enough. Man.
I do enough of it at work and everything that I kind of just don't want to do it on the weekends.
Right. It's fair enough. Fair enough. So I've been keeping tabs on you a little bit, here through social media and stuff. And I know, we've traded some messages and so forth as we've been trying to get, connected to get you on the podcast. And You've been getting after the Kings of Spring here pretty hard here the past several weeks. So I just wanted to see how the Kings of Spring were treating you and if you've had any luck.
Yeah, I called my buddy Chris, and I haven't gone hunting with him in forever. And we kind of went our separate ways. He got a job, I got a job, he's got a girlfriend and all that. And but I always was still friends with him and everything. We just haven't hunted together. And I call him. I'm like, dude, we should go after the turkeys with a longbow for 6 weeks straight, nonstop. And I guess so. We started, getting tags and stuff. And I think the second week we didn't have a tag, but the first week I had a tag. I went. He filmed me, and we got pretty cool. We had 2 toms in at like 30 yards, but I mean, it was the first time me shooting a longbow and everything. I mean, I practiced beforehand, but I don't know if you ever shot a longbow. I mean, 30 yards is a polk, and yeah. So I mean, it was cool to get them in range, or it was probably in range for a compound, but I mean, I definitely wasn't going to be shooting that far with a longbow. And then the third week I filmed him in western Wisconsin, and we didn't have too much luck. We did get pretty close on a couple. They were about 90 yards away, but it was pretty cool because we're running up the hill, like these big hills in western Wisconsin. We're running up the hills and they're gobbling, and we're trying to get in position, but they ended up busting us and everything. But
right.
He ended up having some run-ins with his work schedule and all that. So we kind of didn't end up going the rest of the weeks here. But the first 3 weeks we tried.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I have to say, man, that's doing it with a longbow is pretty ambitious, man. Because I mean, it's a hard enough time for me with a shotgun. I went with my compound last year with no success, and a turkey is just one of those things, man, that they're really good at keeping me at a distance.
Oh, no doubt. It always seems like they're super easy to get to, and then when you're actually hunting for them, it's a different story.
Oh, I know, man. Every deer season, I could have my pick. Usually, every deer season, I have them. Like I almost had one. I think it was 3 years ago. Almost fly into me while I was in my stand. Like there was just a flock came flying in, and it saw me at the last minute and dodged me. But I thought I was going to take one to the face in the stand that day. But I have no problem getting into them during bow season. But when turkey season comes around, it's a whole different story. I mean, I have an added, I guess, challenge now where my daughter's 8 years old, and she's, interested in hunting. So, she's not, old enough to really take deer hunting yet. And, she can't pull enough poundage back with a bow. I mean, I take her shooting her bow, pretty often at the range and stuff, but it'll be a little while before she's ready to go, sit in a tree stand with me to go after some deer with a bow. So usually turkey season's like the big hunting time for her, because she has a little 410 shotgun. I can take her out. On a mentored hunt. So, I don't get a lot of time in the blind, because she's good for maybe like 2.5 hours, and then she's like, Dad, I ran out of snacks, I'm ready to go. So,
you're right.
So that usually cuts my time short, unfortunately. I will get a chance here here at the very end of turkey season here in PA. I'll get a chance to actually go out with my dad for the first time in, like, I don't know what, I was probably, last time we hunted turkey together, I was probably a teenager, and it's probably been over 10 years since we've actually even hunted together. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, which will be pretty cool to do that. But let's dive into a little bit of deer hunting. As much as I do like some turkey hunting, I want to hear how'd your 2016 deer season go?
Oh, my season was pretty. As far as my hunting goes, it was pretty lame. I mean, up until the end, but I actually got on some. I do a lot of trail camera running and shining and stuff in the summer, just to try to get on, just to find some bigger bucks to go after. And I had some giants on camera, like a couple of them that were probably close to booner range, and it's kind of tough to find that big of bucks on the public land, even here in Wisconsin. And so I was pretty pumped. And the only problem is where I was getting these trail camera pictures, and I actually shined a couple of these bucks too, is the problem is it was all public land that I never stepped foot in scouting wise. So it was all run and gun, everything unscouted. I just pretty much had to look at a map and try to figure out where these things were located and how they're moving and everything. And so my whole early season, I pretty much focused on trying to hunt buck bedding areas where I thought a couple of these bigger bucks were. I ended up probably going, I think it was 9 sits or 10 sits in a row without seeing a deer.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm hunting like out in this watery, marshy crap, trying to figure out, I'm hunting like specific, like bedding areas, buck bedding areas where I think they're going to be coming out of. I pretty much kind of go around these bedding areas with like a crosswind, and I'll try to find some bigger tracks or a rub line or something coming out of these areas, and probably shouldn't try to sneak in close and set up with my lone wolf. And I wasn't having any luck. And a lot of times when you hunt like that, you're not going to see, 10, 20 deer a night, because, you're not hunting, a food plot or, the whole bedding area. You're hunting mainly just like a little, point coming off, and you're like, okay, he's going to be bedded down on this end of this point here or something like that. And so I went 10, I think it was 9 or 10 sits in a row without seeing a deer. I was getting pretty bummed. I was running cameras at the same time, and there was a buck I was after. I named him the Donald. And I'm not really a big fan of naming them, I guess. It's just more of a thing for me to do to keep track of them, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
And so I was after this buck called the Donald. I had a bunch of trail cam pictures of him in the summertime, and it was like, I think it was mid-October. It was around the October 20th range when I got him. I picked him back up on camera on a scrape line like 5 minutes after shooting light in the morning. And it was literally like on a totally different public chunk, like 4 miles away.
Wow. And
it was, that just right there was kind of mind-boggling to me. I was like, I can't even believe out of, he's got all this private in between that he could be betting on. And I picked him up on a scrape line like 4 miles away. I marked it on the DNR website and everything. I was like, holy crap. So then I was after him for a little bit and no luck. And then my buddy Skyler, co-owner behind the boat, he's in the Marine Corps right now. He's been in the Marine Corps this is going to be his 6th year. He's getting out in early August, and for good. And so he came back a week, like the Halloween weekend, or the Halloween week. So we had a whole week to hunt. So I took all my time to film him during the Halloween weekend, and oh man, that was some of the best hunting. We had like, I mean, our goal was to shoot a 2-year-old or bigger, and we had probably 6 or 7 different 2-year-olds that were like, man, it was always like 45, 50 yards away, and it's like, oh man, just a little bit closer, we can never get them in. And then on Halloween day, we sat a ridge top in between these two. We were actually on the point, and it was one of the best days I've ever hunted. We had like 13 different bucks, I think we've seen, and 2 giant, big deer, probably close to 150 inches area range, and got really good footage of them. And that was cool. They're like 45, 50 yards away on top of the hill, and they ended up actually, the thermals were coming up hard that day, and they actually ended up both busting us. But yeah, I mean, if we would have set up a little bit higher. And then after that, I had a few days to hunt myself. I ended up getting close to a buck that I was after, an inland snag. He was probably like I don't know. He was a good 3 or 4-year-old for sure. I got trail cam video of him like scraping and stuff. He got snot blown out of his nose. It was pretty cool. But
nice.
I was sitting on a parallel trail along a cornfield, and there's a big ditch crossing, and it was the only water in the area. It's weird. It comes out of these rocks. I don't know how it all works, but like you'd think down below there would be more water, but it's actually up top where the water was, the only water in the whole area where I could hunt. And I like to set up in there because, when they're running all day, especially when it's warmer out, they have a place to get some water. And I actually saw him, and he crossed, and he went down below to get a drink of water, and I wasn't set up properly. And I grunted at him, and that was the last time I seen him. I didn't even see him walk away. He just went down, and that's all I saw. So I don't know what happened to him. And then after that, my dad, I was going to film him for, I think, 3 or 4 days with the crossbow, and he ended up driving out to western Wisconsin where I was hunting, and it took him 4 hours. We were set up, and we were up on top of a ridge top between 2 bedding points, and we had a pretty good 2-year-old come cruising through it about 20 yards, and he shot that one. So that was pretty cool. Nice. I got a video on that on YouTube, and then on our Behind the Bow channel, and then when I hunted a couple times before or after that, and then it was gun hunting, and I filmed my uncle's gun hunt, and that led to I know this is a lot, but that led to late season bow hunting here, and I just really have never had any luck late season hunting. I've always tried hard, but a lot of times the public land is just, they really aren't on the public land. A lot of times around here, like, all the fields and stuff are mainly on private, and you can get those public chunks that the deer are coming off the public, but a lot of times they're pretty hung up on the big private chunks that don't even get hunted, and big cedar swamps and stuff. And I found it was like one of the last weekends of season, and I was driving, and there's just this pound of trails coming off the public, and I was like, all right, I gotta hunt this. So I went in, and I'm actually working on a film right now. It's probably going to be our best film yet here. and it pretty much showcases what I just told you from beginning to end, my whole season, and I ended up getting a crack at a 2-year-old that was off the ground, no blind, just sitting, and it was just one of the craziest hunts I've ever been on, like craziest stories, and I ended up killing that buck, and that was the end of my season.
Nice, man. I mean, it's pretty wild. I'm just listening to like all the different like things you had going on during the season. I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, man, that's like 3 seasons worth of stuff for me.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I definitely pretty much go every single weekend I can, I guess.
No, that's awesome, man. I mean, good for you, dude. I mean, I would love to be able to get out that much, and I'm all for anyone who has the opportunity to do that. There was a couple of things you mentioned that I wanted to kind of pick your brain about. So,
sure.
One was just kind of agreeing with you and saying, you know, that the public land late season hunting is a challenge. Like for me, it's like I kind of put my chips in the Ohio public land basket nowadays, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
For me, living in PA, where hunting's a lot of heritage in terms of hunting, but just not a lot of great hunting in a lot of cases, or at least compared to, you know, when you start hitting some of the Midwestern states. So I'll hunt some public land around where I live. And then we do have a farm, you know, back home that my in-laws own. And, you know, so I will go back for some weekends and hunt that. But predominantly it's, you know, I'm spending my time out here, and I kind of save my time, and then I hit Ohio and hunt some public land because I've had good success there. And then late season, I will come back and hunt our farm because, like you said, it's like there's fields that are there, and there's some food plots in. The other thing is the way our family farm is kind of hunted too. It's almost like hunting public land. So because there's just a lot of people that hunt it. And so once late season hits, I know everyone is pretty much done hunting. Rifle season's over, gun season's over. It's gotten cold, so all the fair weather kind of hunters that do hunt the farm are no longer coming out. So I basically have the farm to myself at that point.
Definitely, yeah, I hear you there.
Yeah, and I've actually had this past year. That was kind of my approach this year. Well, I think I did 2 sits on the farm in October. And then everything else was public land out by me in the eastern part of the state. And then I went to Ohio and hunted and killed a nice deer. And then I came back and hunted the farm for like 3 days over Christmas, over late season. And there was one deer that I had on camera that I thought was decent. Like he was one of the ones that if I saw him, I would take a shot at him. And I had him on camera in, I want to say end of October. I picked him up on camera twice, and then I had him during the rut on a scrape once, and then I had him in late season a couple of times, like after the season was over, just to know that he made it through. But I saw him on the hoof twice in 2 days, late season. So I think I got his number. I think I know what he's doing. Right. So I'm gonna try to play it cool until I get the right opportunity, and I think I know where I need to set up to get him next year. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. But the one thing I wanted to ask you is running trail cameras, right? So I know you said you're doing a lot of that during the summer. So like you were mentioning, public land doesn't often have food plots and stuff like that. And that's typically, if you want to get an inventory on private ground, you're hanging them on food plots and stuff like that because you kind of see what you have going on. So how do you do that on public land? Like where are you hanging them to kind of get your inventory? Before we hear how Curtis is using his trail cameras, I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to our partners at Exodus Outdoor Gear. With summer upon us and Velvet Rut kind of coming up, you're probably considering picking up some new cameras for this season, and I would highly recommend that you check out the Exodus cameras when doing so. They're preparing to ship their new Lift 2 camera this month, which is backed by their industry-leading Exodus 5-year no BS warranty and a 50% off theft or damage replacement policy. The guys from Exodus are also hooking up all the Truth from the Stand listeners with a 10% discount on all camera purchases when you head to ExodusOutdoorGear.com and use the promo code TRUTH at checkout. My no BS warranty to you is you won't regret picking up this camera. Great camera, great company, so check them out. And now back to the show.
Sure, yeah. Well, the summer is when I'm running most of my trail cameras, and that's exactly what you said. Is I'm just trying to get inventory. I'm just trying to find out what kind of caliber deer in the area. And I really didn't really get a whole lot of pictures within like the last couple of years until this last year, I think I kind of got something down where, a lot of times I was setting up like, okay, this is where I think they're bedding, and this is where the food source is. I'm going to put the trail cameras on a trail in between there on the public, right?
Right.
Well, I'm focusing more on, like, you'd be surprised. They're kind of stupid spots. Like, you think you're like, this is a stupid spot that you hang a trail camera, like right on the edge, like right next to parking lots and stuff. But if you think about it, okay, you're trying to think, I'm just trying to get deer on camera. I'm trying to get inventory. And I'm thinking, okay, where are these deer going to be at night? Not
right.
necessarily, I'm not looking to hunt the spot. I'm just trying to get inventory. So where are these deer going to be at night? And a lot of times, and it's like right next to the parking lots and stuff, in these stupid little spots, like literally, sometimes 20 yards right off a parking lot or something. And I actually got some really nice pictures just right off parking lots and stuff. But I mean, obviously on public land, I imagine Pennsylvania being pretty pressured, but
right.
in Wisconsin, I mean, it's pretty pressured as well. And you got to hide them too. I did have one stolen yet last year, but for the most part, if you keep them, if you hang them high and kind of think, okay, you don't put them on just trees out in the open. Obviously, they're going to get taken. You gotta really think, okay, where are people not going to walk, but you can still get deer on camera and things like that. So, I mean, I use a stick and picks for that. You can get them up in the trees and stuff. And it's pretty much what I do in the summertime for trail cameras. And then once I don't run too much of them, like early season hunting wise, I'll back them off. I'll put them closer to like private food sources and stuff just to see what I get. But I don't want to get in. I don't like putting trail cameras like in near bedding areas and stuff unless I know I'm gonna like come back and hunt it and I already brought my scent in there. Then I'll maybe plop a trail camera here and there. But I definitely don't run them that hard early season up until they start hitting like scrapes and stuff. Then I really like putting them on the scrapes and seeing what I can get on those scrapes. And then obviously during the rut, I like to put them on like funnels and stuff, but not. Usually I don't put the trail cameras where I hunt. Usually I try to keep them away from all my hunting areas. So when I'm checking them and stuff, I'm not, ruining anything.
Right. So it sounds like whenever you're getting your inventory, you're finding places where you think deer are just going to travel, and then you're just trying to use your woodsmanship or any maybe scouting you've done the year prior and understand, okay, if they're ending up here, they're likely coming from here because I know there's probably a bedding area over in this spot, and then here are the terrain features they're probably going to use to get there, right? Is that kind of a fair way to kind of think about it?
Right. Yeah, definitely. A lot of times, I think, though, in the summer, they're obviously going to be bedding a lot closer to the food sources and not so much in a lot of the areas that I'm going to be hunting. So, I mean, these are just random spots, I guess, closer to the food sources and kind of weird spots where I get the pictures in the summertime. But then, right, like what you said, earlier in the season, I don't run too much trail cameras, but, say, okay, I found a big buck bed or whatever off this point, in the off season, and I'm going to plop a trail camera on a trail coming from that point to this bean field, and look, I got him on camera at 8 p.m. or whatever. He's probably bedded there, and then I'll go hunt it. I mean, I've never really had too much luck doing that, but that's what I do.
Only takes once, right?
Right. Exactly.
Right. So I know, it's funny because, some of the folks I hunt with will, whenever I say I kind of, I kind of prefer to hunt public land these days, it seems like, and they kind of think I'm a little nutty just because I do have access to some private ground and we have some food plots and we do that type of stuff. But for me, there's this challenge that that public land presents, and there's also something about it just being public and that it's there for us to use, and I feel like we should take advantage of it. But I was curious what it is about public land that kind of gets you going, or what kind of is the draw for you to hunt. Primarily what it sounds like. Almost I don't want to put words in your mouth, but almost exclusively public land. So what is it that draws you to that?
Yeah, definitely. I guess you could look at my 2015 season, and that will explain that question down to the T, where I had a small private chunk. It was about 25 acres that I had access to hunt. And I ended up putting a food plot in, and, there's something about putting food plots in and getting trail camera pictures and stuff, and having your own property to hunt without anyone, screwing around or anything. There's something about that that's cool, obviously. I mean,
right.
Farming for whitetails is pretty cool. It's just, the thing is like, so that year it was opening day, and I was sitting in the food plot opening night, and I had this pretty decent 3-year, I think it was a 3-year-old, 2 or 3-year-old. I ended up shying him in the summertime, but he ended up doing, reading the script. He walked down the edge of the wood line, came right in front of me at 20 yards, and there's just something about that. Like, it just, I don't know. I mean, I literally I feel like I could have told anyone, hey, just go sit in this tree stand and, you're going to be on deer. And I ended up passing that deer. And, I mean, it was opening night, and I was like, yeah, I think I don't feel like shooting this for some reason.
Right.
And so then a couple weeks later, I ended up scouting this property way back in the public swamp, and in the springtime. So I ended up kayaking down a river long ways and walking through water up to my knees for a long ways. Ended up, I had bedding marked on my GPS, and I walked in with a crosswind, kind of running and gutting, and set up accordingly, and everything just fell into plan. And lo and behold, some bucks came out, a nice 2-year-old. I ended up shooting him, and it was like the reward. He was actually smaller than the one I passed in the food plot, but like what you're saying, it's just so much more rewarding, and I feel like it's an adventure, and you continue to learn more, and you get to travel around and experience new things and new terrain, and it's so much. I just find it a lot fun, more fun, hunting public land than private property, I guess.
Right. I think there's a couple things you said there that I 100% agree with. One is just the challenge of it, right? It's rewarding. Like, you got to put in the work. It doesn't just, there's not a deer that follows the script. If it follows the script, it's because you did your homework and you put yourself in the right spot. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's when they followed the script. Not everyone else can do it, which is another kind of reason I enjoy it, right? Is, if you take a nice deer on a piece of public land, that's a little bit of a feather in your cap, right? It's kind of like, hey, I know what I'm doing. I mean?
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I feel like you definitely, nothing against the private land, nothing against private land hunters at all.
No, because they're smart animals, so they're hard to take no matter where you take them. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy to shoot a big buck on private property, but I feel like you get to learn more and experience a lot different things on the public land. And I don't like to just sit there and be content with myself. I like to challenge myself, and I want to keep learning. I want to keep growing. If you're not continually trying to, improve your game, I mean, I don't know. That's how I look at it anyways, I guess.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think the other aspect of it too is I always say this: I'm the worst shed hunter on the planet, because anytime I'm shed hunting, I'm scouting, which is obviously the wrong thing to do. But the reason I'm the world's worst shed hunter is because I'll take a walk on some public land, in some areas that I think are bedding areas, if you will. But I'm always curious as to what's around the next corner or what's over the next ridge, and then by the time it's like I'm done, it's like I've walked 10 miles. I've not found a single shed, but I found like 3 beds and like a bunch of rubs. And a bunch of places that I want to set up for the next year. And that's kind of, I guess, what's intriguing to me. It's, look, fortunate that I have the private access, or the private land that I have access to. There's no doubt about that. It makes it nice, especially whenever I want to take my daughter hunting and stuff like that. I can do it in a controlled environment.
Right. Yeah.
But there's I guess the allure of the unknown when it comes to public land, and I don't have just the 240 acres and then that's it. It's like I can only hunt up to the property line. But like whenever I'm on public land, when I was in Ohio, like the land I was looking at to possibly hunt was in like the tens of thousands of acres. You know what I mean? To choose from. And now granted it wasn't all necessarily connected, but it was there for me to hunt if I felt so inclined. I could have hunted a different piece every day. Which is just something I find really cool, that I'm not limited. It's if deer aren't moving on our farm, which was the case last year, which is why I didn't go back and really hunt on some of the weekends. It's like if they weren't moving on the farm, there wasn't anywhere for me to hunt there. You know what I mean? Because there's only 240 acres, and if there just weren't bucks showing up, it's like you can't hunt them if they're not there, and they just weren't on camera. I wasn't seeing anything, until like the end of October. And then very little on camera action during the rut even, so it just wasn't a real active year. And if I was just banking on hunting there for my entire season, my season would have been kind of, squashed pretty quickly.
I definitely 100% agree with you there.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned, that when you're hunting public, that it's all the things that we just kind of talked about, and that it's all these different terrain features and stuff like that you can kind of come up on that you just may not know are there, or you find something that's new. So with that kind of in mind, what type of terrain, are you hunting? Tell me a little bit about, I guess, some of the places that you're hunting in Wisconsin, and then even beyond, because I know you've taken some trips to like Missouri and such.
Yeah, sure. Early season, I mainly focus on Wisconsin, and I'm hunting mainly, large cattail marshes, swamps, bogs, cedar swamps, tamarack swamps. It's not fun. I mean, what nasty stuff that, you need waders and all that. And then once rut rolls around, I usually focus more on in the hills, in the hill country. I do have some spots, and that's in western Wisconsin, but I do have some spots, I've killed the biggest buck that I've ever shot in the swamp during the rut. But I really like it's just a different feel when you go out west. It's just beautiful, it's beautiful, the giant hills, and it just always seems like there's bigger bucks getting shot out there. And I definitely, I like to hunt over in western Wisconsin for the rut. And then, there's some farmland around here, but mainly all the farmland around here, it's just kind of flat, open areas, and that's it's kind of boring. I don't really enjoy it. There is some public land that is farm property, but most of that is pretty much all privately owned.
Right. So it sounds like you're hunting a lot of swamps, and then you kind of transition to hunting some more hilly, get some interesting terrain features and stuff whenever the rut rolls around.
Exactly, yeah. And then the Missouri was I hunted some swamps in Missouri, and then when I shot mine, it was more of a hilly area, I should say.
So how do you hunt the swamp area differently than you would hunt hilly terrain? And I ask because I've never hunted swamp areas before. Most of the hunting I've done is kind of like more mountainous, or ridge tops and deep hollows and stuff like that, but nothing really ever that I would consider a swamp. But how do you approach those two differently, or I guess similarly, even if that's the case?
Right. I've kind of gotten it. I'm obviously always learning and picking up on things and stuff, but for the most part, swamps goes early season. I'm focusing on bedding areas and buck beds. I don't have a whole lot of luck. This year scouting, I'm banking on a spot that I found, and I feel like I could capitalize on it early season, and I know bucks in the area and everything. That's a different story. But, early season, I'm focusing more on like islands, points, little fingers. I like to focus on transition lines, more on bedding areas, getting away from people. If you're walking through a bunch of water and stuff, I mean, if you're walking and you're thinking, man, this sucks for a half mile or whatever, usually like everyone else is thinking the same thing,
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, I mean, if you can get away, where these deer are bedded, in the swamps, that's definitely where you want to be. But, as far as like rut goes, I like to focus more on doe bedding during the rut, and I try to find areas connecting different doe bedding areas. Like, say there's a point where I just found a whole bunch of beds, and then, I don't know, quarter mile away to a half mile away or whatever, there's a cedar swamp or a tamarack swamp, and there's a bunch of beds like on the transition line of this tamarack swamp or cedar swamp. I'm just giving an example. I like to focus, and I try to find the safest route from that bedding area to that bedding area, or away from hunters, how bucks are getting from that bedding area to that bedding area. And there's usually some type of rub line or big trails that connect these bedding areas, and I like to hunt those in the swamp. And then also, I mean, if you're obviously hunting like the downwind side of, a cedar swamp where they're bedded, or a tamarack swamp where they're bedded, or, a finger that juts out where they're bedded. If you're hunting the downwind side of that, usually there's a good trail with some good rub lines and stuff on that I like to focus on and on.
Nice. So I'm always curious to get guys' opinions about how they kind of start with a new piece of property, right? So, I know that you do a ton of boots on the ground scouting, but when you've got a new piece of public land that, say, you've never been on before, but you've kind of heard like, hey, or you've driven by it, right? And you say, hey, this looks like maybe a place I might want to check out. What advice would you give to someone who found a piece of land that they've never been on before? How would they start kind of going about assessing that piece of land? Are you starting with an aerial? Are you looking at topo maps? Are you using any type of technology pieces, whether it's Google Earth or any type of other mapping technology that you're using to kind of get a look at these things? What's your starting point?
Yeah. Well, obviously the best time to start scouting is, I guess any time, but the best time to put, boots down and actually go look at it would be, I like it when everything's frozen, super cold, and so there's no water you're walking through or anything, and then no snow at all. And then, so you're looking at pure fresh, 100% fresh sign from last season, and you're looking at, all the human sign plus all the deer sign. You can see all the ribbons, you can see all the tree stands, you can see where people are walking, you can see trails, scrapes, rubs, everything. No snow is covering it up. You can cover ground really fast and easily without busting through, sitting there and wasting a lot of time, trying to get across the swamp or whatever. But yeah, I mean, obviously the first thing would be to look at like a aerial map or a topo map. I usually don't look at too much topo maps for like the swamp areas, because it's pretty much all swamp. I do occasionally look, see where the higher ground is, because there is islands and stuff out in the swamps. But for the most part, I'm looking at aerial maps and then the topo maps and the aerial maps for the hills. But I mean, you definitely want to. I've always had better luck. The bigger, larger tracts of public land. I do have some smaller tracts that are good from time to time, but for the most part, I like looking for the big tracts of public land with big chunks of private connected. Like when I was down in Indiana scouting, I seen a bunch of public chunks that had a whole bunch of like tiny little privately owned chunks all the way around the property. And if you think, I mean, obviously a couple of those people probably hunt and then hunt the public, so they're just walking right off their backyard into the public land. They don't have to walk as far as we do, from a parking lot or whatever. So I try to stay away from those types of areas, and I like to focus in on more of areas where there's bigger chunks of private property. And usually the bigger chunks of private property are obviously a lot less pressure. Maybe they only gun hunt it. And a lot of times the bigger chunks, they practice some type of, management or whatever. So I like to focus in on that. But yeah, the first thing I want to do is look at aerial maps and where all the parking lots are located. I want to try to get away from parking lots. And then I want to try to find, potential bedding areas off of the maps, mark all that, looking at Google, and mark all those on my GPS. And then I want to go look at those. I want to put boots on the ground in the ideal time in the spring and go check those areas out. I'm definitely in the swamps. I'm looking for transition lines, islands, points. I usually tend to walk all along the river bends. There's a lot of good bedding along the river bends. Obviously hard to get to areas. And in the hills, I pretty much like to focus in on all the points jutting out, and then the top third. And then I try to, once I get boots on the ground and try to figure out all that, how the deer are moving through, where all the bedding is, I like to pull it up on my Garmin base map online or on the computer and kind of get a whole view of everything. I'm like, okay, I walked all this. I know where this is, and it's fresh in my head. I'm looking at all the points, and then I try to and then I start putting game plans together and picking out trees. And I think one thing is important for me is I think you got to always go in with a plan, some type of plan. If you're just going in to hunt, there's a bunch of sign here, I'm going to set up. Oh, there's a bunch of rubs here, I'm going to set up. I think you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You gotta put a plan together, and 90% of the time the plan isn't going to work. But you can, a lot of times the plan won't work, but then you'll learn from the mistakes that you make and kind of put a different plan together off of the failed plan. And eventually, after you scout and hunt and you start picking up on things, you start to get a feel for how these deer are moving through areas and stuff. And it gets a little easier, but obviously it's still hard.
Right. There's a couple of things you mentioned there, man. Like one was, the idea of kind of going in, looking at public ground that has, farms that are adjacent to it. That's one of the things that I actually did this year near our family farm. There's a big chunk of public ground that's basically, there's our farm, there's the neighboring farm that would be to the left of our property, if you will. And then adjacent to that guy's farm is a big chunk of public land. It's, I don't know, I want to say it's probably pretty close to 2,000 acres or something like that. And so I went in and scouted it this year because I was like, you know what? Well, it's in a rural area, right? So everyone around there owns acreage, right? Like the smallest lot of acreage in that area is probably around 60 acres. I use the Onyx Maps, the app.
Yeah, same here. Yep.
So I can see property lines and I can see how much acreage somebody has and stuff like that. So I started investigating it and recognized that everyone around that public land has acreage that they're most likely hunting their own property. Like you said, they're going to walk out their back door, they're going to walk in the timber, and that's going to be all there is to it, right? And so I was like, I should probably go scout this and check this out because I've never gone to check it out. And see if, one, if I see any sign of hunters in there, and two, obviously want to see if I see any deer sign. And I got in there and I was pleasantly surprised. Like there was only one spot that I saw any sign of someone else hunting there. So there was no ribbons. I saw a couple turkey shells or a couple shotgun shells in the one section I wouldn't even consider hunting anyway.
Right.
And then I saw, just enough rubs and scrapes that would make you go, this might be a spot worth checking out. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't polluted with it. But it was just enough that said that they're using the area, and it seems like they're not getting bothered. So
definitely.
So I marked that spot on the GPS, and I'm looking forward to this fall because I think I'm going to do a couple early season sits in that area. One of the other things I wanted to kind of touch on was, when I'm trying to figure out how to ask this. So you mentioned buck beds a couple times, so and I think, whenever people are looking for buck beds, it's sometimes hard to kind of tell, what defines a buck bed. And I know, that when we look at buck beds, there's almost like two classifications, and this is, pulling it right out of the Dan Enfalt playbook. But there's the primary bedding, and then there's like the seasonal bedding, right?
Yeah.
So, what are you looking for specifically whenever you're looking for buck beds? Like what's something that you see as like a dead ringer that whenever you're on public land that's letting you know that you're in the chips for a buck bed?
Okay. Well, I think one thing is I think I'm looking for obviously a bigger bed. And then, but like if I think back to when I was scouting this year, I'm thinking seclusion is key. Like I feel like if there's people around, that there's not going to be a big buck bedded there. I found this tiny little island coming off of the mainland, and it always seems like they always have all the advantages in their favor. Like it's always they're downwind of the mainland. It's always, there's no trees. It's always a big bed. You know what I mean? So they always have the advantages and everything. But yeah, I mean, mainly I like to find big beds, beat to the earth. And, I like to look for big tracks as well. I mean, big tracks don't lie, I guess. And, I mean, a lot of times you can look at rubs, and those can be a little deceiving, because I've actually kicked big bucks out of beds while walking and hunting, and they're sitting on this, little high ground up in the marsh, and the trees that you look at, you're like, wow, I would look right at that and be like, oh, it's probably just a little buck sitting there. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I mean, it was actually a nice buck. So I mean, I feel like rubs can be deceiving, especially in the marsh when their feet are down in the muck and stuff, and the rubs are really low. And you're thinking, oh, well, it's probably a little buck, but obviously when their, knees are a foot, a couple feet down in the muck, they're obviously going to make rubs, lower to the ground. But, like what you said about all the private landowners around you that are around that public chunk that all had their own property hunt. I think that's the biggest thing. I think is, like, a lot of people, I think, will hunt an area or two, and they'll just be like, well, this spot sucks because I didn't see a deer. They hunted it during the rut or early season. But if you, like, put your brain to it and think, about the crops and about the pressure and the time of year and all that, a lot of times, a lot of these chunks that I'm hunting aren't necessarily good all year round. And it's usually a small window, a small time frame where it's a small time frame during the rut where they're good, or it's a little tiny public chunk that has a ton of human pressure, during the gun season or whatever. So there's ribbons and all this stuff. So people will walk in there and be like, oh yeah, this sucks. There's a bunch of ribbons and stands up and everything, but the thing is, that chunk isn't getting hunted early season, the first couple weeks of the season, and that buck's bedding, on the back there. But obviously, those beds are a little harder to find in the springtime. You can mainly find, the primary bedding areas. Well, at least for me, anyways, is I can find the primary buck beds, in the secluded areas. But as far as like finding like those early season buck beds, I think you almost kind of you have to go with your gut almost and kind of just go from there.
Yeah, and they'll bed in the weirdest places. Like I kicked one up last year on the side of this ridge that I would have never thought a buck would have been bedding there, and sure enough, kicked him up. And I was actually taking my daughter on a squirrel hunt. We kicked him up together, and it was kind of, I had told this story before, but it just, I went out in the morning, got in the stand, and didn't see anything, and I told her I'd take her on a squirrel hunt. I kicked a buck up that morning. And then I went and got her right around, I don't know, probably like 10:30, 11 o'clock to take her on a squirrel hunt, 'cause I promised her. Took her up in the woods, and we walked up just to kind of where my stand was at, because it was a piece of ground that was behind my in-laws' place, where it was kind of like we were staying there for the weekend, so it was easy for me to get out and kind of get some time in the timber. I didn't know if I was going to see anything or not. I scouted it a little bit, but there had already been bucks seen up on that ridge, so I just figured I'd throw a Hail Mary and do it. Came down, got her, went back up there, and we were sitting, watching for squirrels. And then, sure enough, a Pennsylvania 8 shooter walked by us at like 20 yards broadside.
Whoa, no way.
Yeah, and I didn't take my bow, and I was thinking of taking my bow with me when we went, because I was like, I don't have to carry the 22 and the bow. I was like, because she's not old enough to carry it yet, so. I was like, I'll just leave my bow here. But if I would have had it, it's like she would have had like the whole experience, like seeing Dad, at least shoot at a buck. I never say that it's a sure thing, but that was about as close to the sure thing you were going to get, because it didn't get much of more of a chip shot than he was presenting that day. But
man.
Yeah. So public lands. So the one thing that I think that scares people off or runs people off is kind of what you were talking about earlier when we started the conversation, which was the 9 to 10 kind of sits without seeing a deer. I've had that happen to me on private ground before, which is, it makes for a miserable 9 to 10 sits for sure. But, public land in general is a grind, right? You're going in kind of knowing you're not going to walk into like high deer density, and you're trying to put yourself in a position that if you see one, it's the right one, is kind of like the approach I take. So what do you do differently than others that helps you have success on public land and kind of endure that grind?
I think it's almost got to be, it's one thing that it's your mindset. If you're not mentally prepared to see nothing all the time, it's just not going to work out for you. Right. I mean, I always just tell myself, it takes 30 seconds. It takes one hunt. Just keep grinding.
Right.
I mean, you could fail 100 times, but it takes that one time. I mean, I've been like this last year, early season, I had so many setups where I'm like, oh man, this is going to be good, and don't see a deer.
Right.
And then it's that late season sit. I ended up walking around 3 miles trying because the wind wasn't right for the trail that they were coming out on, but I needed to hunt that night. And I ended up walking around like 3 miles. I actually hunted this public chunk like 100 times. And I ended up walking around trying to pick up some tracks coming out of some known bedding areas I know, and there was no tracks. And I'm like, where the heck are these things? I don't know where they are. And so I couldn't just walk down the giant trail that was coming out because the wind was horrible. But I knew that the wind was going to switch like an hour before it got dark out. So I ended up walking around, busting through the ice, and I was wet up to my knees. I was all aggravated. I ended up walking back to the parking lot thinking, well, this is probably one of the worst hunts I've ever been on. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go, the wind is switching. I'm just going to go sit off this trail. I was literally 150 yards away from the parking lot. And not, in the dumbest spot, I'm seeing a chair, with some back cover and everything, but there's no way I thought to myself that night that I was going to shoot a deer. I was just sitting there till dark just to make myself sit there. And lo and behold, deer come out, 25 yards away, and I ended up shooting one. It's like, it takes one hunt.
Right.
And I think my confidence was kind of running low. I'm usually a pretty confident person. Like, usually every single time you go in, I'm thinking, oh man, I'm going to put the big buck down tonight. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you go in there and try to stay confident and keep a positive mindset. I think that's the biggest thing. And obviously scouting, a lot of scouting.
Right. So there was one thing you mentioned. So it was like a 3-mile walk to get to, well, then to ultimately get to 150 yards away from your truck. But that's neither here nor there. But I wanted to ask you, I want to talk about access a little bit, because, I mean, even on the most manicured farms, right, or the most manicured hunting properties, access is still critical. Can you, I guess, talk to me a little bit about how important access is to you on public land and how meticulous you are about your entrance and exit routes?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, access is huge. I think it's probably one of the most underrated aspects, I think, of hunting. I mean, I'll pretty much go way out of my way to not cross deer paths. And if I do cross the deer paths, I mean, sometimes you have to, if you're hunting a ridge up top, you want to come from the top, because the deer are going to be coming from the bottom, say. And it's private property up on top. You can't come from the top. And the deer are going to come from the bottom, but you have to come from the bottom too. But that's where you need to be hunting. So, like in that case, I at least try to cross deer paths where I can obviously shoot to them. I mean, I've got burned multiple times, but like, say out in the hills, you're hunting, you're expecting deer to come from the bottom early in the morning because that's where the food source is. And you're coming from the bottom. I try to walk, most of those deer come up and they walk, up that draw, and then they go back and they go lay down in the points and stuff. Where I try to like walk up, more of a jagged area where the deer trails aren't, just to try to stay off of those main nice deer trails that kind of come up. And then if I have to cross those, I'll try to cross them where I can get a shot, obviously. I mean, I'm trying to figure out, access is so hard, and I'm trying to figure out, the best ways to do it. And a lot of times there really isn't a good way. Right. I've tried, me and Skylar, when we were hunting hills this last year, I mean, we tried dragging scents across, trails where we're going to walk, and we tried doing all sorts of stuff, just pouring out a big bottle of Pink 69 right where we crossed the trail. So maybe it always seems like, you might be able to fool like the smaller deer, but it always seems like those big does or, something that you'd want to put an arrow in, it always seems like they're going to get you. And I don't really believe in any like the scent killer and the ozonics and all that stuff. So, I mean, I guess I just try to do as best as I can to try to stay off of them. My Missouri hunt, is a good example, is I tried to stay up top along along a private barbed wire fence, but it was like these thick, nasty thorns where there was like no deer traveling up there. It was just pure. The deer didn't even want to go in there. So I walked up along those thorns and to hunt the top of this hillside where these deer were. It was a river bend, and the deer were cutting in between that river bend and the top of the hill. So way before I even got to where I wanted to hunt, I cut up top along all that nasty thorn stuff and walked all along that whole thorn edge to get to my tree, so I didn't like mess up anything down below or where I thought maybe deer would come from. And then my GPS actually ended up malfunctioning a little bit, and I actually went too low and actually went on the deer trail. and then the does ended up, hitting my deer or where I crossed the deer trail, but I ended up actually being able to kill a buck that day.
Nice. Yeah, the one thing I try to do, because I mean, it's access is just no matter where you're hunting, it seems like it's one of the most challenging things, right? It's especially if you don't have any control and you're on public and you only have so many places where you can enter if it's surrounded by private or whatever the case might be.
No doubt.
I got a tip from a fellow the one time, which was, he was like, wherever you're going, whatever direction, if you've scouted it before and you kind of know how the deer trails are running, he was like, run in the opposite direction of them. He's like, because the last thing you want to do is meet deer head to head on the trail, or travel the same direction or in the opposite direction of them. So if deer trails are running along a ridge left to right, or diagonally, he's like, you want to shoot vertically across them. He's like, because you only ever cross each trail in one spot. He was like, which kind of gives you less of a chance of running into deer as they're using the trail. And I found that to be helpful. Now, it's by no means is it the best solution, but whenever I don't have great access, it's kind of that's kind of the method I'll take, just to kind of reduce the possibility of running into deer, and then reduce the amount that I'll be cutting across their track too.
Yeah, definitely. That's a definitely good point to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a Jeff Sturgis special there.
Jeff Sturgis.
Yeah, good
nice
fella. But so I want to change gears here really quick, to talk a little bit about behind the bow. So just as a disclaimer, I'm a novice self-filmer. I figured that, bow hunting for whitetail wasn't quite hard enough, so I should add a camera into the mix and just ensure that I'll get busted. It's like, it just add more for me to carry. I figured it just wasn't challenging enough, so I needed something a little extra. That's not the truth at all. I thought it'd be kind of fun, and it is a lot of fun. I like it, but it's like every time I do it, I get my camera set up, and I'm like, why do I do this? It's like I've never gotten anything on film yet. It's like.
Believe me, I've definitely been there.
Yeah, it's like I get my stuff all set up. I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I get a shot opportunity or something happens, and it's like it happens so quickly I don't even get the camera on it, because I always walk in. I guess the one thing good that I do is before I walk in is I tell myself what I'm there for. So if I want to get footage, like say I've filled my buck tag and I'm just kind of doe hunting or putting meat in the freezer, if you will. At that point I might say, all right, you know what, the footage is going to come first because I'd really like to get something on film. But if I'm still like in the throes of like the rut and I'm trying to get on a good deer or whatever, I'll walk into the woods and I'll tell myself, the shot comes first. If I can manage to get the camera on it in time for the shot, then great. But otherwise, I'm going to make sure I have the shot opportunity first and take an ethical shot before I worry about the camera.
I definitely hear you there. I mean, I'm definitely not going to be passing up on a really big buck just because my camera's not on it.
Right. Right.
I'm definitely not. I'm not one of those guys.
Right. Yeah. That's the camera wasn't on him, so I didn't take the shot. I'm like, yeah, I haven't killed enough big deer yet in my lifetime to make that call.
Right.
But so I wanted to ask you, man, how did you get started with filming, and where did the idea of behind the bow come from?
Yeah. Well, I started filming. I was always interested in photography and video cameras and filming things. When I was really young, I used to skateboard a lot, and I used to videotape, stupid little jumping off jumps and all that. And then when I hunted, I actually brought, like these really tiny little Sony handy cams or whatever, and we didn't have any tree arms or anything, but I filmed a lot of oddball hunts with my buddies and stuff. And I liked putting, I think we made a chipmunk hunting video a long time ago with our bows. It's pretty stupid. It's got like a death metal in the background and stuff, but,
nice.
Yeah, I mean, I always enjoyed just putting like little videos together, and I used like Sony Vegas and it's just something I was like doing. And then I actually watched a DVD. It was a White Knuckle Productions DVD. I don't know if you know White Knuckle Productions. Yeah. Todd Prignitz is the owner of that. And I watched a DVD. It was called The Grind. And it was pretty much him bow hunting a bunch of different leases, in Iowa, and I think he was in Ohio and Illinois or whatever. And that DVD, for some reason, got to me when I was younger. Like, I really I still look up to Todd. And I was like, dude, I want to be on White Knuckle Productions. I want to be on one of their DVs. So I used to, and this was when I was young, like years ago. And I always emailed them, and I was sending them footage and stuff. Obviously they're not going to take my public land, not seeing anything, whatever. And I ended up shooting one of the biggest bucks of my life in 2012, and ended up getting that all on film. And I emailed him and told him, and he's like, "Yeah, dude, we want to put it on our DV." And that was like one of my biggest. That was how I kind of got into the hunting industry as far as like filming wise goes, I guess. And that was a huge accomplishment for me, especially being younger, and kind of just changed my whole outlook on a lot of things. And then I was filming and hunting with them, I should say, sending in footage and stuff for them for a couple of years after that. And then I kind of, my buddy Josh Ogilvy and I, we kind of thought to ourselves, like, we should start our own, hunting and filming deal. I mean, I can learn how to do all the editing and stuff, and I've done it a lot. And so we started Behind the Bow, and we just really enjoyed everything bow hunting and filming, and we just wanted to show the passion. It wasn't really anything, serious at all. And he ended up not wanting to do it anymore. He kind of was like, the filming thing isn't for me. He just wanted to enjoy bow hunting.
Right.
So at that point, it was just me, and I've always had the passion as far as like showing my hunts, and I love to help inspire and motivate people, especially like the people that feel like they're the underdog. They don't have the land, they don't have the money, they don't, they feel like, they watch all these hunting shows on TV, and all these people have these giant food plots, and they're seeing these giant bucks, and if you don't shoot a 4-year-old, you're not a good hunter and all that stuff. And I don't necessarily like how the hunting industry portrays a lot of that stuff. And that's my biggest motivator for me, is I want to portray the hunting industry the right way. As far as, everyone has their own goals. If you want to shoot a spike buck for meat or whatever the reason, go ahead. I mean, whatever makes you happy. You know what I mean? It's not about making all these other people happy. And my buddy Skyler has been with us for the longest time while we started Behind the Bow, and he definitely couldn't do much because obviously he's over in California in the Marine Corps. I mean, he always loved to hunt and everything. And he'd come back every year, I'd film him. But he's co-owner now, and he gets out in August. So, I mean, and then we added Greg Litzinger, obviously, the bow hunting fiend. You had him on the podcast a while ago. I listened to that. And I'm trying to find people that are going to shed bow hunting in the right light. It's really been becoming a rich man's sport, and I definitely want to put a different outlook on the hunting industry, and try to help and motivate and inspire people. I want to bring out the best, do-it-yourself bow hunting films that I can to help. I get a lot of messages and stuff, actually, and not only do I want to help these people, but, I get a lot of emails and messages and stuff, but them emailing me and being like, dude, this is really cool, it helped me do this, that drives me even more. Like that makes me become, an all-around better person, not just hunter, but everything. It just makes me feel like I need to step up my game, and I want to, it's something special. I really like it,
Yeah, man. I think, one, I think you portray it the right way, and it's kind of why I was drawn to to your videos. I've watched, but I think every single one of them at this point. It's honest, it's authentic. You know what I mean? And I think that at least I hope that people are starting to become more drawn to that type of content. Because what you said, where it's becoming a rich man's game or a rich man's sport, there was a time, if you go back to the time of, British rule, if you will, hunting was only for the kings and the royalty. You know what I mean? They were the only ones who took part in hunting.
No, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it was definitely a rich man's endeavor. And that's, another thing it's interesting is like you do it all on public land. And I think it's also why it's important that it's, that we portray public land hunting as something to behold, because, some of the attacks that are on the public land, whenever you get out into the western states and stuff like that, quite literally are trying to turn it into a rich man's game, because if they remove our public land, they remove our access and remove our ability to, do what we love to do and what we're passionate about. So I think there's a lot of good things that you're doing for a lot of different reasons. And I'd love to hear that you love motivating people to go out there and get it done with whatever means that they have. Is honestly one of the reasons why I started the podcast was, I knew for me that I had a bunch of questions about stuff, about whitetail hunting, and that I wanted to learn more about it. And I was like, and I'm sure if I have questions about these things, other people do too. I was like, so maybe I can be a conduit and be the one not afraid to ask the stupid question, and someone else can learn from it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I 100% agree with that.
You know what I mean? So before I get off onto on a public land rant, though, I'll cut short here, and before I get too out of my element, but I've kept you here for a little more than an hour, man, and I want to be sensitive to your time here, but I do want to see if you can give us a hunting story. So I always like to kind of go on a hunt with our guests. I wanted to see if you could take us on a memorable hunt with you and tell us what state you're in, what time of year you're hunting, and give us every detail from the truck back to the tailgate.
Yeah, sure. I guess I got two stories, and I'm only going to say one of them, but I got a whole bunch of stories, but two that are really, kind of engraved in my brain. But I guess I'm going to probably bring up that Missouri hunt, because that pretty much changed my whole outlook on, going to different states and stuff. I was always just a Wisconsin hunter. I didn't really even had any interest in going out of state. I was always like, yeah, it'd be cool to go out of state, but you never really do it, You just, it'd be cool to go, but you're always just hunting Wisconsin. It's the same old. And after I shot my buck in 2015, I was like, all right, I'm going to give Missouri a try, and that's it. I'm going to do it. I didn't have any vacation. So it was pretty much weekend hunts for me. So I would work, I'd get my 40 in Monday through Thursday, and I would have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. So I would work till, 7, 8 p.m. on Thursday night, and then I'd have put my 40 in and then drive down. It was like a 7-hour drive to northern Missouri. And the first week there, I hunted twice, once in the afternoon and once in the morning. But all I did, and this was like mid-October, and all I did was pretty much 100% scout. Walked around, tried to find areas, looked them all up on aerials and topos and everything, and trying to put something together. And I was literally just trying to kick deer up. Like, I knew my best option was to kill, my best, I guess, I don't know how to say it, but the way I don't know how to say this.
The best opportunity?
Yeah, the best opportunity. Sorry.
It's all right.
Best opportunity. Yeah, thank you. The best opportunity for me, I think, was the rut. So I pretty much focused in on that first weekend there, jumping deer. I just wanted to jump deer. I wanted to find bedding areas and jump deer. So I pretty much walked all along the river bends, and I walked numerous different properties, and then I started focusing in on the one property that I was, jumping the most deer and finding the most sign. And then the second weekend rolled around, and I went in actually hunting. I scouted and everything, and I found it. I found quite a few good rut spots the first weekend that I was going to focus in on, but I wanted to save that until, you know, a later date when, you know, they're actually rutting and stuff. So the second weekend I went in and I found this really good creek crossing along this river bottom, and it was pretty warm, but there was a good cold front that night, and there were still crops up on the private field. And to get to this spot, you had to walk through, like, I don't know, it was probably a good 100 yards, 150 yards of this poplar swamp. And it was like, you couldn't even walk through it without getting snagged and everything. And finally, you know, I was walking through that every morning. And quick story, I was down by the creek before I went in to hunt the spot, down by the creek, and I was taking a piss, and all of a sudden a beaver slapped the river and scared the crap out of me. But yeah, don't ever do that in the dark. But
Right.
So anyways, I hunted this creek crossing. I ended up seeing some really good bucks there that night, but they came out a different trail, like 50 yards away. And I didn't think I bordered up the area at all. I was like, all right, I think I might be able to get away with coming back. And I think they're going to come back for the morning. So it's going to be cold, and I'm expecting them to come back. So I moved my tree stand, I don't know, 50 yards away from where I think they're going to come back. And I was going to set the next morning. So I came back in and I waded down the creek. Kind of comes back to access. I waded down the creek just in case they were going to come back across the creek there. But I waded down the creek, and then I intentionally walked through a bunch of like down trees and stuff. There wasn't any really deer trails there, but I walked through a bunch of like down trees and stuff, and got to the tree, and I ended up passing a really nice buck. Actually, I mean, I don't even know why I passed it, honestly, but it was just one of those things. I don't know how to explain. Like, I don't really have it. Just sometimes when you look at a deer, you're like, I don't know if I want to shoot that, but I kind of wanted to save. You know, I had some other spots to hunt, and I'm like, oh, you know, I don't want to be done.
Right.
So I was sitting there. I passed that nice buck, and then the days after that was a Friday, and then the days after that, Saturday and Sunday, I completely it was started raining out, and I was hunting. I didn't see any deer, and I was sleeping in my, you know, I was hunting all day, 6, and you know, I came back to my truck, everything's wet, and I had to go find a washer, you know, dryer place, or dry cleaners. And I ended up finding one right before they closed, and I ended up drying all my stuff, and I was kind of disappointed in the whole deal, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I kind of wanted to save that one spot, so for the next weekend, and then I ended up calling one of my buddies from the hunting beast, Josh Beeman, and he's like, dude, you should go check out this piece. So I drove an hour to go check this piece out, and there was a bunch of people in the parking lots, you know, camping. There's a bunch of fires and stuff, and that kind of discouraged me. I was like, oh, there's a lot of people here. And there wasn't anyone at the other piece. And so I went back to the other piece, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go sit the good spot, the spot that I was waiting for. And so it was about a 2-mile walk down a horse trail, and then I was walking. That's when I was talking about the access coming up on the top there with all those thorns and everything.
Right.
And I was walking the top of those thorns, and I ended up going down too far because the GPS was like, my tree's down there, and I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, no, I know it's up here, and it was. I was like, all right, well, the GPS must be right. I started walking down, and all of a sudden the point goes back up, and I'm like, oh, crap. and I'm walking on the deer trails. So I'm like, I was kind of pissy about that, you know, to begin with. I was like, great, now I just ruined my hunt. So I walk back up, get to the right tree, and it was just a beautiful morning. Like the view, you could see everything, and it was all the leaves were all red. You know, everything was. It was like one of the best trees I've ever sat in as far as the view goes. Like you could sit there all day and not see a deer and be like, "Wow, this is great."
Right. Nice.
And so I was sitting there. I don't know. I thought I heard some grunts down lower, and then I saw some does come up, and they hit my deer trail from the right side of me. And I was thinking, like, here we go. You know, they're going to start blowing and all that. And they're sitting there, you know, kind of looking around, smelling where I walked. They didn't seem too concerned. But then I'm just sitting there filming them, and they're, like, staring straight ahead of them. So I look to my left, and I hear a stick break. So I look to my left, and here comes the buck. And, you know, it was a good 2 or 3-year-old buck. And I was like, oh, man, I'm going to shoot this buck. And I grabbed my bow, and the does ended up blowing. I think they were blowing at him. But even though they're on my trail that they're smelling, I think they're blowing at him. And he kind of stopped and, you know, like, huckered down, like, oh, what were you running for? They kind of ran away, and I pulled back and ended up shooting him. And he went 40 yards, and he dropped, and that was the end of that. And I think the only reason why I like to say that story is because it wasn't the biggest buck I've shot, but it was the amount. It was out of state, and it was the amount of hard work I put in, and it was just, if you watch the video, the reaction after that, it was just like, oh my God, you know, like, it's just one of the best feelings ever, knowing that a spot that you picked out actually worked after all of the stuff that you already went through. And it was a great day. And then on top of that, to get that thing out of there, I ended up, so I shot it at 8 in the morning. I ended up walking all the way back to the truck to unload all my stuff. And I'm thinking, it was just rolling hills, up and down. And it wasn't like too steep of hills, but it was, you know, there's some good hills. And I had a decent horse trail to walk on, at least. At least I wasn't like walking through a bunch of, you know, crap.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I'm like, man, how am I going to get this thing out of here? And I had this little, like, $3 ho-ho sled from Walmart. And I'm like, all right, I think I'm gonna try to, you know, put it on this thing and see what happens. So I ended up going out there and putting it on the sled, and I got about 100 yards, and I'm like, this is gonna work. So then I started, you know, dragging it just normally without the sled. That wasn't gonna work, and I'm like, this is not gonna work. I got to think of something else. I was like, all right, well, I think I'll be able to go back and get a deer cart at Walmart or something. So I ended up walking back again, and I got to my truck, and there was a group of hunters down at the end of the parking lot. And I'm like, man, and they were there for a while, and I was like, I wonder if they got a deer cart. So I walked down there. They ended up having a deer cart. So they luckily let me use the deer cart, and I went back and I put it on the deer cart, and I still couldn't get it up the hills. and I was like, man, and it was getting dark by this time, and I'm like, I don't want to be doing this in the dark. So I ended up actually cutting him up out there and putting parts of him on the deer cart, and ended up dragging him out that way. And I was about, 300 yards away from the parking lot, and the guys, they came and helped me roll that thing the rest of the way. And they're like, dude, we thought you were lost and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I was pretty beat after that, but it was about 7 p.m. when I got out of there.
Nice,
and
man.
Started driving home. And even though, I mean, it was tired and everything, it it was a great feeling knowing you're driving back with a buck in the back of your truck.
That's what I was gonna say, man. It's like it makes it all worth it whenever you got a deer in the bed of your pickup. It makes it all worth it. My favorite part of that video is your monologue when you're in the truck, just all ticked off, man. I actually laughed out loud because I was like, how many of us have been there before, like sleeping somewhere where you don't want to sleep, just had a miserable day, and you're just like, dude, this is awful. Why do I even do this? You know, you know what I mean?
Right.
But hey, man, I do what's that? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, that's right.
No, I was going to say I do appreciate you coming on the show. I want to be sensitive to your time, but before I let you go, tell all the folks out there that are listening, you know, where they can find out more about you or more about Behind the Bow.
Yeah, we're on YouTube. Just type in Behind the Bow, and a bunch of our videos will probably pop up. And I'm on Instagram. We're on Instagram at Behind the Bow, and Facebook. Obviously, we have a Facebook page, Behind the Bow Facebook page, so you can check us out there.
Awesome. Yeah, and I highly recommend checking out the videos, the Behind the Bow videos. They're all awesome. There's good storytelling in them. The videography is really good, and it's just honest, genuine stuff. You guys are a good follow, too, on Instagram, and be sure to kind of check these folks out and give them a follow on Facebook. It'll be well worth your time. So, hey, I appreciate you coming on, Curtis, and we'll have to do it again real soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Clint. I appreciate it.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I want to thank Curtis for joining us, and be sure to check out the Behind the Bow videos on YouTube and give them a follow on Facebook and Instagram. I'll put those links, of course, in the blog post show notes. Also, I want to thank all of you for tuning in and giving me an hour plus of your day. Be sure to hit that iTunes subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We've got some great guests coming up in the next few weeks. Also, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star iTunes rating. We'd be very much appreciative of your review. And be sure to follow Truth from the Stand on Instagram and Facebook if you're not already doing so. If you'd like to get involved in the show and have us or a guest answer your questions, or if you'd just like to recommend a topic for discussion, email me your suggestions at truthfromthestand@gmail.com, or you can click the email button on our Instagram account. And finally, I need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible: Whitetail Institute of North America, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Lone Wolf Portable Tree Stands. And until next time,